All right, it is 7 o'clock. I am so glad everybody could join me. I'm going to share my screen, and unless somebody has a particular question, we are going to be talking about a contract review. So let me pull it up so that we are good. You would think that I was all prepared, but as usual, I am not. That's okay. Do. We are airdropping and we are sharing our screen. Oh, let's see. What did you all say in the chat? Hello. Hello, Val. Hopefully, you all are doing well. Hopefully, everybody had a great 4th of July. That's what I'm talking about. And, oh, somebody else needs to be let in the room. Boom. Okay. I'm almost there. Almost there. View more. And we are going to save PDF export, open file. Here we go. Every week, every week. Yeah. Let's see. Share screen and boom. 3, 2. All right, here we are. Let's go. We're going to do basic contract law. Dun, dun, dun. So, let's start from the beginning. Now, of course, if you all have any questions, just holla. So, contract law, what I do want to say as we start this is we're not going to be going over any specific contracts for each state. Every state has differences in how what happens when somebody buys a house and what are the rules and what do the contracts say. In fact, some states there are multiple contracts. And in any state, you don't have to use a contract if you're a buyer or seller that is given to you by an agent. You could hire an attorney and do your own thing. What we are going to talk about tonight are the basics of contract laws so that as people, hopefully there's no problems, but if there are problems, you understand a little bit how the law works so that you can know how to best help your client. So when it comes to contracts, there is a lot of vocab in this chapter, right? And I like to take all of the vocab that is in the chapter and kind of organize it in a way that kind of makes sense. So some stuff when it comes to contracts is just going to be like vocab words like, what does this mean? How do contracts work in general? You need to know about contracts' legal statuses. So we'll talk about valid and voidable and void and unenforceable contracts. We're going to talk about what happens when contracts are breached. We're going to talk about what's required for contracts to be valid. We're going to talk about different types of listing contracts. And let me let whoever it is we just lost, boop. We're going to talk about clauses, different types of clauses. But first, what I'm going to do is unlock our room so everybody can get in. Do I even remember how to do that? More. I don't remember now. Now that I'm on this screen, people, I'll just let them in as they come in. So, our first definition, duh, it makes sense. What is the definition of a contract? This definition is really, really important because you can't take anything out of it and still have a contract. So, you see here, it's an agreement between properly identified, legally competent parties to do some legal act in exchange for consideration. There is not a single part of this that is excess. Like you can't say, oh, well, what if I take out this or take out that? You take out any one of those things, you have an issue. So, first thing I want to do is talk about the definition of consideration. It's anything of value. So it's usually going to be money, but we could talk about favors could be exchanged, items could be exchanged. It could be forbearance where you're agreeing not to do something or you're allowed not to do something, an action, anything. If there's an exchange of something, we're going to call that consideration as long as that something has value. Is it generally money? Yes, but it could be anything. Now, some terms you're going to see a lot. You got express contract versus implied contracts. Express contracts are ones that are either written, so it's in writing, or it's verbally stated. You all talked about it. That's what we mean by express contracts. An implied contract is one that is implied from conduct and actions. So we have a contract here that could be legally binding in a court of law because of our actions. We didn't agree, but we all kind of understand if I don't do what I promised to do, we could end up in front of a judge. The best example of this is going out to eat for a sit down dinner. You know, if you go to sit, go sit at a restaurant, then you go ahead and you pay after it's over. And if you were to dine and dash and not pay, depending on the cost of your meal, they could take you to jail. That's because it's an implied contract. When you went to the restaurant and you said, hey, seating for three, and then they brought you menus, they took your order, we were all kind of assuming because of our behaviors, there's a contract here that says, if you order the food and you eat the food, you promise to pay us. And if you don't, we can take you to court because we have an implied contract. We didn't agree to everything verbally. You didn't sign something when you came in. It's implied from the actions. Our next vocab word that you know you're going to be tested on would be executory contracts and executed contracts. Executory contracts are ones that are still under contract. They're ongoing. I think that's a good word to think of it. Ongoing. And an executed contract is one that is completed. Now, executed contract, when you see it versus executory contracts, we're talking about it's ongoing or versus is it completed. You also hear the term executed contracts, and we mean signatures. So when you have a purchase contract between a buyer and a seller, and you're trying to talk to the other agent, you want to make sure everything is going the way it should. Once you have a buyer signature and the seller signature, we call that a fully executed contract. I know, executed here, executed there, they sound exactly the same. They are. But what we're talking about is completed signatures when we're talking about signing, and we're talking about did you complete what you promised to do if we're talking about executory versus executed. I know you would think they would come up with some other word for this. Alas, they do not. You're just going to have to tell by the context clues. And we have lots of words in English that are, you don't know if it's read or read until you look at the rest of the sentence and the context clues and mean, are we in present tense or past tense? Same concept. There's no easy way to get around that, but it is something you're going to be tested about on, or they're just going to assume you to know. Marilla, you said, tell me about it. English is so weird. I think that's why I like you to study it so much, is because there's so many random rules. I don't know, but I can't imagine anybody who takes this test and passes it and English is not your first language. My hat is off to you, because people who English there is their first language gets caught up with all the tricks and all the words and whatnot. So for it to be your second language, that's amazing. You must be a genius, because I don't think I could do it. Okay, our next words here are bilateral contract and unilateral contract. Well, we got bi and we've got uni. We know that bi means two, and we know uni means one. So the best way to think about this is when you look at the contract and what the contract says, once everybody signs, is it one party that has to do something at the moment something is signed, or is it two parties that have promised to do something? So if it's one party has promised to do something, that's a unilateral contract. An example of this would be any type of contract that is if then. So I say, hey, Stacy, if you house sit for me, if you decide to house sit for me, then I will pay you $50. Well, you're not promising the house sit, Stacy. You're saying, we're just saying, if you do, I will pay you the $50. Another example of this, and I think is really good, is a reward. Rewards are unilateral contracts. If I say, oh no, my pet parrot got away, I could be promising to pay $100. I'm making a promise to pay $100, but only if you find my lost parrot. If you don't find my parrot, I don't owe you $100. But if you do find my parrot, then I owe you $100. Only one of us made a promise in the reward scenario. I promised to pay. You couldn't have promised to find because I don't know. I mean, God forbid my parrot's dead. Maybe somebody stole it. Maybe it flew away to some other state. I don't know. But that's a unilateral contract. One person is promising to do something in response to somebody else choosing, or they happen to be able to do something. Versus our bilateral contracts, which should be any type of purchase contract. Because in a purchase contract, the buyer is promising to buy and the seller is promising to sell. Both people made promises that are actionable right now. That's the difference between your bilateral and your unilateral contracts. So I always think, because even if you understand the difference, you need to really know which each contract type is. So you can either take a screenshot or do what you want to do, but here are a list of different types of bilateral contracts, and here is a list of different unilateral contracts. I don't think you should memorize the list, but I do think it's worth, as you go through, oh yeah, this makes sense why this is unilateral. This makes sense to why it's bilateral. So taking screenshots of stuff is amazing. All right. I would say one of the most requested things that I have to explain to people is this whole valid versus void contract deal. Valid versus void contracts. Think of valid versus void as you're either alive or you're dead. There's nothing in between. You're either pregnant or you're not. You're not a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. It's either something is valid or it's void. Now, if we're talking about pregnancy, well, you could be 4 weeks pregnant, you could be 12 weeks pregnant, you could be 20 weeks pregnant, you could be 32 weeks pregnant. I mean, there's different statuses. You're really, really pregnant, or you're pregnant, but it's, you're early in the term. There's levels of pregnancy, I guess, if you want to say that way. When it comes to valid contracts, there's different levels or states of validity. So a valid contract, by its definition, is a contract that meets all the necessary elements, which we'll go over in a moment. But if you know, MCLL, mutual agreement, consideration, legal capacity, and lawful objective. If it has all of these things, it is a valid contract. Once you decide it's a valid contract, then you have the different states. Once you know you're pregnant, now let's see how far along you are. An enforceable contract is one that the courts would say, yep, this is good. You made a contract. You've promised to do it. And if you mess it up, somebody can sue you and the courts can force you to do what you said you're going to do. That's what we mean by an enforceable contract. It's a valid contract. You had all the terms and you met all of the necessary conditions so that if it ended up in front of a judge will be willing to tackle, hey, you didn't do what you're supposed to do, let me get involved. Or it could be an unenforceable contract. Sometimes you meet all the necessary elements on the base level, MCLL, but it's missing something. It's missing something because of the circumstance, and a court won't step in. A great example of an unenforceable contract would be an oral real estate sales contract. If you have a real estate sales contract, it could have MCLL, mutual agreement, consideration, legal capacity, lawful objective. It could have all four of those things. But because it's a real estate sales contract, it has an extra need. It needs to be in writing. An unenforceable yet valid contract would be an oral real estate contract for the purchase of real estate. It has to be in writing. It's still a valid contract. It's just that the courts won't get involved. Now, you could have a valid contract that's not just enforceable or unenforceable. It could be voidable. It could be voidable. And voidable is the idea that even though you have MCLL, there's an out. There's something going on with the MCLL where one or both of the parties could say, you know what, never mind. I no longer want to go through with this contract. I'm making this contract void. I want to be like, actually, the truth is you're missing one of the MCLLs and I'm not going through with it. It looks valid on the outside, but when they open it up, it's not so good. Right? And really, you said you need to check if California and emancipate under the age can be under in a contract. Well, I can always ask. I can always ask. Let's ask Uncle Ray. I haven't asked him a question in a while. Let me see. That's a great question because I know California is different. In California, a contract between minors is going to be with a contract with a minor is void. In most other states, it would be voidable. But let's ask Uncle Ray. Get me a sec. Hey, Uncle Ray. I'm trying to help a student, and we're just wondering if there is an emancipated child in California, so and under the age of 18, can they be in a contract?
Hold on, checking. Yes, in California, an emancipated minor can enter into a binding contract. A non-emancipated minor can also enter many contracts, but they're typically voidable. If there's a particular kind of contract that you're looking to get for your student, I can tell you a bit more about that.
So he's usually set to answer questions for me for North Carolina or Michigan, but I know on the test for California people, minors, it's a void contract, and then voidable every place else. So great question, really. Great question.
Hey, Candace, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So in Georgia, it's voidable. So, for the state of Georgia for a minor. And
Yes,
so
in Georgia, and I'm just hold on a second because I don't think I shared my sound today. So repeat your question so everybody online can hear it, and even if they're
sure. In the state of Georgia, it's voidable for a minor to enter a contract. So I guess I'm gonna have to do a little bit more digging because that kind of trips me up when it comes to questions. I had to kind of do some more digging in regards to that, but
that's a
what
great
kind of threw me
question.
off?
So
Yeah,
here's what you can do. If Georgia, and I'm just picking on Georgia, but there's lots of states like Georgia, I'm pretty sure that you have one set of questions that is national, right?
right,
And when one set of questions that is Georgia specific,
correct.
all right?
Yes.
So, what I would say in general for this topic, especially, oh, I have a minor is a void or voidable. The majority of states, you're going to go minor is voidable. It doesn't
Okay.
matter if it's a state specific question or if it's a national question, you're going to go with a minor signed a contract, it is voidable.
Okay.
However, there are different states and different topics where it could be different. Like, let's say you were in California. Now, California just has one test, but let's say California was like Georgia and Michigan and North Carolina. What I would tell you to do is on the national side, you would choose voidable, but on the specific state side, you would go with void if we were talking about California. So everything I kind of teach, I go with the national kind of point of view. And if
Right.
it's something major like this void with minors, I'll mention other states.
Right.
But for most states, it's voidable. California would be void.
Okay.
So as in Georgia, you're good.
Thank you.
No problem. Great question. Great question. So I think we all understand now that you got valid or you got void. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. Then you got to know how far along you are, what state of pregnancy you're in. You could be pregnant, but you could be, it could be in an unenforceable contract or an enforceable contract or avoidable contract. It's just different levels. I am 100% sure every single one of y'all will have at least one of these words on your exam. Now, we cannot forget about this whole void contract thing. It's where you think there's a contract, but there's not. It never was a contract. And the best example I can think of this is if you had two kids, if you had one that was 10 and the other kid that was 12, if they made a written contract to do anything, nobody in this world would think, oh, they're going to end up in front of a judge. No, 10 and a 12-year-old can't get under contract. There was never a contract to break. Y'all tried the good, you tried well, you tried hard, but it was never a contract. That's what we mean when we say void contract. It wasn't possibly a contract. Nope. It was never, ever, 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 ever a contract. You might have wanted it to be one, but neither of you was over the age of 18. That's not a contract. You might have wanted it to be a contract, but if I try to hire Val, my bestie, to hide a body, murder and hire a body, hide a body for me, if she did it and then I didn't pay her and she tried to sue me, the courts would be like, excuse me, ladies, A, it's illegal, and B, you never had a contract because you didn't have legal objective.
Now you're telling everybody about me.
Look, do you really think either of us would get caught? Absolutely
No.
not. No, there you go. That is, but if anybody's watching in the future, that is not an endorsement of our skills. Sure.
Yeah, we're not admitting to nothing.
We're not admitting to anything. So you saw the chart. All of this should make sense now. A valid contract is going to be binding and enforceable because it has MCLL. Now, I know it says enforceable here, but just a regular old, if you say valid contract, we assume enforceable. Now, if it's an unenforceable contract, that's a type of contract. There's something about it that makes it unenforceable. Fine, there's that extra. But if you just see valid, you're assuming, oh yeah, it's binding, it's enforceable. That's like the mainstay. A voidable contract is one where, again, one of the parties could choose, I don't want to go through with this. It's actually, we thought we had all the necessary requirements of MCLL. Actually, no. And then you've got a void contract, one that nobody ever thought it was a contract to begin with. Hopefully that makes sense. And I know it adds so much confusion to people. So I like to call this, or I'll give you all the example of the judge and the desk. The judge and the desk. If a judge were to get a contract across their desk, they're going to look for mutual agreement, consideration, legal capacity, lawful objective. As long as those things are there, just without doing any more research, a judge is going to call this valid. If you have a contract on a judge's desk and with no other looking at it, no other story, it looks good, it's valid. And then the judge's clerk comes in and says, actually, here's an extra piece of information you needed to know. And then the judge is like, oh, now that I have this extra information, then it would be voidable. They found out that, oh, the person who signed, they're 17. Their signature looks good, but they're 17. They're not 18. It would be voidable. And then a void contract, again, the two kids, or, I don't know if you all have pets like me, but when I do birthday cards to my parents or siblings or Christmas cards, I sign for my pets. If my two cats signed a contract with each other, even if I put their paw prints in ink, it was never a contract. It just was never anything. It didn't mean anything. So good, Val. I'm glad the breakdown helped. I hope that clarified some things as you've been testing, and now you get some of the nuances that you might have been tested on before.
Yeah, that brought it out real good. I had a problem with voidable.
Good.
especially in my state, because they like to ask the same question a couple of times,
Good.
you know? So, now I know it's just gonna just be voidable. I'll just keep
Yeah.
it safe.
Yeah, just think about the judge and the desk. If the
Right,
judge were to just look at it and not have any extra information, it looks valid.
right.
But then when they dig a little deeper, they're like, kind of like opening a can of or a thing of spoiled milk. On the outside, it looks fine. Then you open it
Mhm.
up, you do a little sniff test, and you're like, absolutely not. This is not the one. Hmm.
Right, right. That's
That's when
cool.
it would be voidable.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So just remember, if something is a void contract, it is not legally enforceable. No obligations were ever being put on either of the parties. No legal rights were created. Sometimes, if it was, well, not even sometimes, if it was anything that was against the law, you got a contract to do something against the law, that would be void. Right. And if there was no compensation in the contract, if you all agreed to do X, Y, and Z, but nobody was being getting any kind of consideration for whatever the action was, you never had a contract. Remember, consideration is one of our essential elements of a contract. It has to be there. So there are some things that in most states will consider automatically void. If it's somebody with who's been incompetent, somebody who long term the court said, "Hey, I'm sorry, this person can't make their own decisions," that's a void contract. It's going to be considered void. Anything with the legal actions, if you're requiring somebody to do something impossible, or if it's an impossible event that's supposed to happen, they're going to be like, "Now, you knew full well that Mickey Mouse was not real. You can't sign a contract with Mickey Mouse. What do you, no, just no. You can't promise, to shake Mickey Mouse's hand. Like that's just an impossible event. That's not the real Mickey Mouse. And don't get into me, all of my Disney adults. I understand Mickey and Minnie are running around Disney World and Disneyland and all, but we all know that's not real Mickey. And if you didn't, I'm so sorry to tell you that. And also, Santa's not real. Right? And then, if it's missing any of the material details, so a lot of courts if will say, "Hey, if you have a contract for a piece of real estate and it's got mutual agreement, it's got consideration, it's got lawful objective, it's got, legal what am I saying, missing, it's got legal capacity. If there's something major missing, like let's say it's a duplex and you fail to mention which side of the duplex it is, that's one of those things where they'll be like, okay, that's a major material detail that we can't, yeah, we're just going to void this out. This is a lot of detail on this slide, but I think what you all will find is as you're going through taking practice questions, these are a lot of the examples they try to get you with. Oh, is it voidable? Is it valid? Is it void? These are things that are generally always going to make it void. So again, we're not going to go over the same thing that I just talked about, but I will give you a second if you want to take a screenshot of this so that you can see, what does valid mean versus void versus voidable versus unenforceable. If I'm putting this on YouTube, it's not for somebody to steal it and, sell it, but it's because I want to help you all. Take a screenshot, or, you can always email me. Here's my email and say, "Hey, Candace, could you send me a better um, copy or image shot, whatever you want to call it, screenshot, that's what it is, of that one page where you talked about contract enforceability?" Of course I will. Absolutely 100% I will. You just need to email me. All right. Should have been enough time for you to copy that one. So let's talk about that MCLL one more time. I said in order for there to be a valid contract, you needed to have MCLL. And in case people don't know, rappers used to be called MCs, Master of Ceremony. So you got LL Cool J, he's an MC. There's other MCs, but that doesn't work out so well with my acronym. I know, he is good looking, isn't he? Ugh. So MCLL, if you want to have a valid contract, there are all sorts of illegal contracts I would like to have with Mr. LL Cool J, but it's got to have mutual agreement. There's got to be consideration. There's got to be legal capacity, and there has to be lawful objective. I'm pretty sure all of us know what this means, but let's do a quick review. Mutual assent or mutual agreement. This is also called a meeting of the minds. This is one of those things. This is why it's so important to make a list of your synonyms, words that, kind of end up being the same. But there has to be a clear and definite offer, and there has to be a clear and definite agreement. Everybody had to come in and be like, yes, we are clear. This is what we want to do. Consideration, I've already told you, is anything of value. Why do I have of value twice? One will never know. But anything of value promised by one party to the other when making a contract. Now, how many times have I taught this slide in class and nobody told me I have one too many of values there, right? We've got legal capacity. So in most states, that means you're going to have to be at least 18. You cannot be, mentally incapacitated. You can't be under the influence of drugs or alcohol, anything like that. You have to have a good state of mind, and you got to be of age to enter the contract. So when we talk about legal capacity, sometimes you'll also hear this as contractual capacity. I am not going to go over this long definition with you. Right. But just know, if you hear legal capacity or contractual capacity, that's going to be basically the same thing. Basically the same thing. Right. And then our last L is lawful objective. So again, it's got to be legal. I can't hire you to do something illegal or unlawful. That is a problem. And I don't know the difference between illegal and unlawful. I'm sure that there's got to be some legal difference there, but we don't care for this test. That's for somebody else to dig into. Also, he looks kind of shady, and he's got lots of interesting looking pills. Okay. Now, remember, I said contracts could be valid, and then once you know they're valid, there could be something going on, and maybe it's that's not how you spell unenforceable. Boop, boop, boop. It could be unenforceable. I'm going to assume I spelled that right. And when we talk about unenforceable contracts in this class, 9 times out of 10, we're going to get to this whole statute of frauds thing. On a scale of 1 to 10, the importance of knowing this term is a 20 plus. You need to know the statute of frauds. And the statute of frauds says not all, but some contracts must be in writing if you want them to be valid. Not all, but some contracts must be in writing if you want them to be valid. Now, the one we are usually most concerned with is this first one. If it's a contract to sell or convey any interest in real property, it needs to be in writing. I could agree to sell Stacy a piece of property and we could shake hands on it and both of us could be okay with it. But if we ever ended up in court, maybe Stacy then backs out the night before, the judge would be like, Candace, that is a very sad story. But because of the statute of frauds, because you all are trying to agree to sell or transfer an interest in property, it needed to be in writing in order for me to get involved. Sorry. This is one you need to know. You're going to be tested on this. Now, I know most of you know that I'm a very full, I want you all to understand things. I don't want you ever to be talking to an attorney or a judge or anybody and say, well, I know what the contract of, statute of fraud says, and you really only know a bit. Just FYI for your own knowledge, these other things have to be in writing as well. Marriage contracts, sale of goods over 500, executor contracts, surety contracts. A surety contract's like a promise to pay, but also leases that exceed over 1 year in duration. Now notice this is for most states. This goes back to Val's question. In most states, contracts that are going to be for something that is going to be over 1 year in duration has to be in writing. I know Val is in North Carolina, so for Val, that number is 3 years. Leases exceeding 3 years have to be in writing. So there is some difference. So to go back what I said to Val, if it's a national question talking about leases, I would say go with a year. If she took that same question, she's not in North Carolina, she's in Georgia, but you get the point. if she was in Georgia, in North Carolina, if the question said what happens, then it would be 3 years. So there you go. That's what I mean by just no. Is the question asking from a national point of view, or is it asking from your state specific point of view?
So
And it,
can I ask a
go ahead.
question?
Yeah.
So a surety contract, you said like a promise to pay, right?
Mhm,
So that's like
mhm.
is for example, like a promissory note?
Yes, a promissory note is a type of surety contract. I'm 99.9% sure that
Okay.
that is correct. I have to
Okay.
yes. You know what? Let's just
Okay.
ask Uncle Ray. You know what? Let's just do this real quick. I just want to make sure. That's what happens when I'm like, yeah,
I was about
sure.
to ask Claude.
It's okay. That's why I'm here. Because what happens on these holidays, y'all know I get all sugared. I'm like, what?
Yeah, me too.
Yep, bonds. Yeah. The surety, the
Mhm.
financial or insurance company that underwrites and issues a bond. So yeah, it has something to do with stuff like that. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Because it is a promise to pay. If you're promising to pay, you basically are in a contract. You know what I'm saying? If you have a promise to pay, especially in regards to the lender.
Yeah, you know what? And now that I think about it, it has more to do with bonds, like a
Okay.
surety bond. Just know if you
Right.
ever see it, that's what it
Yeah.
is, Lee. But
Okay,
I wouldn't
gotcha.
get too I wouldn't get too caught up in that.
Yeah, that's the first time I've really heard of that, but I understand.
Yeah. I only learned about it because of the statute of frauds. I was like, what's a surety contract? Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
hmm
exactly.
But now you know if it's a surety contract, it has to be in writing.
Perfect. Okay.
All right. Now, we talked about the statute of frauds, but sometimes people get that mixed up with the statute of limitations. They're both statutes. Remember, statute is just a fancy word for like a law. The statute of fraud says, hey, some things need to be in writing. The statute of limitation says there's a limit to the law. There's a time limit to the law. And I know you all are familiar with this because I'm really hoping every single one of you has seen at least one episode of Law and Order, SVU, right? Law and Order, SVU. And there's always at least one case where sadly somebody was abused as a child and now they're 35 and now they're willing and they're able to, go after the person that did whatever it is, terrible thing they did. And then somebody's going to be like, oh, but you waited too long. The law said you had to press charges within a certain amount of time. That thing that limits how much time you have before you can press charges, that is the statute of limitations. There's a law that says, oh, I'm so sorry you were abused as a child. You better bring charges within the next 20 years. Now, I don't know if 20 years is the right answer, but you get that concept. That's the statute of limitations. They're putting a time limit. And different laws or things that you can sue somebody for, there'll be a time limit on there. All right. Now, similar to that time thing is latches. The way I like to look at this is the statute of limitations is in writing. It says it is part of the law. You have X amount of time to file a lawsuit. If somebody does something wrong, let's say, you know what latches is like? It's like being in a relationship. And can we all agree if you're in a romantic relationship, if somebody wants to be like, and don't you remember that one time 5 years ago you did this one thing? You'd be like, look, you waited 5 years to bring this up? Absolutely not. That's off the table. There's like an unspoken rule depending on what it was. All right. Now, depending on how bad it was, maybe there is no time limit, but you did this one thing and you forgot to cover, put the lid back on my takeout 5 years ago. Nobody cares. You waited too long to complain. You had like a 24-hour window where you could complain. That's latches. When the law doesn't say, hey, there is a time period where you can file suit, the law doesn't specifically say it, but the person obviously waited too long to complain. The judge could look at you and be like, yeah, you had an unreasonable delay in bringing this claim, and so I'm throwing it out. You waited too long, latches. So think of it, statute of limitation is based on what the law specifically says. Latches is no, it was unreasonable. You should have said something 4.5 years ago. I mean, come on. So there you go. So in order to be under contract, we know that you had to have MCLL, mutual agreement, consideration, legal capacity, and lawful objective. And sometimes I'll put my L's, in different orders. It doesn't really matter. But when we talk about MCLL, I said, hey, there has to be mutual agreement. It had to be mutually agreed to the fact we both want to be under contract. And when you want to show the world that you agree you want to be under contract, you sign the document. The thing about signing a document is you can only see that they signed. You can't tell their state of mind. So it looks like somebody signed and it was a mutual, they wanted to do this. But when you dig a little deeper, it's like the sniff test. You're like, this is actually not, this doesn't smell right. Something ain't right here. Well, when the something ain't right here happens, you do not have reality of consent. A contract must be entered into as a free and voluntary act. But when the judge, when they get this contract to get, across their desk and they look a little deeper and they're like, oh, actually, now that I sniff it little bit, this person didn't really want to be under contract. You do not have reality of consent, right? You have what's called this failure of contract validity. And this will 9 times out of 10 on the test mean that it is voidable. The contract is voidable because it looked like it was good. It met all the criteria on the outside. You did the sniff test. You're like, oh, actually, this don't smell so good. Did either party want to get out of this? So what could cause this, failure of contract validity? Mutual mistake. Both of us were under the assumption of XYZ. It turns out XYZ is not true. We mutually made the same mistake and now this contract doesn't make sense. Okay, that could be voidable now. Misrepresentation and fraud. As a general rule, fraud is a bigger level of misrepresentation. If this was a law class, we would 100% go over the difference between fraud and misrepresentation. I am not an attorney. I just play one on TV or when I'm teaching the class. Now, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to go over this. But as far as we're concerned, it's the same thing. Somebody misrepresented, they defrauded somebody, they meant to lie. Just know if we can prove that there's a lie or somebody was defrauded, then more than likely a judge will be like, actually, we don't have contract validity. This was not under a, free and voluntary act. Did you want to void this now that I know the truth? Then you get to the two that confuse a lot of people, this undue influence and duress. Think of duress as a threat and undue influence as an abuse of power. So duress is a threat. Undue influence is an abuse of power. Now, I don't know if you all can see what's going on the right-hand side of my screen, where one snowman is holding up, basically, mugging another snowman with a hairdryer. I mean, he's threatening them. This is duress.
That's wrong.
It is wrong, right? It just makes me laugh so much. That is duress. That's a threat. Hey, I signed it, but only because they had a gun to my head and told me if I didn't sell them XYZ or I didn't sign here, they would kill me. Okay, well, if a judge saw your signature, they'd be like, but you signed. It looked good until you took the sniff test. And now that you can prove they held a gun to your head, you would be allowed, if you wanted, make it voidable. If you want to void it, you can. Undue influence would be if somebody who and this is hard to prove. Should never, ever in real life, if you start talking about undue influence, you should have already called an attorney. But it's where somebody takes advantage of your relationship. So if you have an attorney that's lying to you so that they can get something to their benefit, a judge might call that undue influence. If you're in a religious organization and this person has lied to you and, based on our religion and blah, 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 and then you sign a contract, they convince you to do something you normally wouldn't do, but because of this special relationship, you did it anyway. That's undue influence. So hard to prove, is way above our pay grade. But for the test, you should know both of those would be falling under. We didn't have reality of consent. It wasn't a free and voluntary act, so it's voidable. All right. So now that we know kind of some things in the states of different contracts, we have two words that we most definitely need, well, some words that we most definitely need to understand as far as what can happen to contracts. And something you'll see a lot about is this idea of a contract has been assigned, an assignment of a contract. And in a contract, all of the contractual rights, benefits, and interests transferred. The rights, the benefits, the interest transferred. But if you're not careful, the obligation to pay, the repercussions, if it's not fulfilled, they stay with the original party. So it's like you're giving away all the good stuff, but if that person fails to do X, Y, and Z, then yeah, you're still going to be held liable. Think of this as when you have an apartment or a rent and you sublet. All of us know if I have an apartment that I'm renting out from a landlord, and then I'm like, "Hey, Stacy, I've got another 6 months left. Do you want to take over this lease for me?" And if she's subletting, she's agreeing to take over the lease, she's agreeing to pay. But if she stops paying, my landlord's going to be like, "That's great. Stacy promised you. But at the end, Candace, you promised me. So Candace, you're responsible for this rent." That would be a great example of an assignment. So could we possibly replace Stacy for me on that original contract? Yes. Or could we write, "Hey, you agreed to take care of this and to live here and to pay, and we're going to make sure that I'm not responsible in any way, shape, or form." Again, call an attorney. It is possible to do that. But just a basic assignment, remember, the original party is still on the hook. I love you, Stacy, but I don't trust anybody that much. I'll be like, "Nah, we need to end my contract, and then you need to get your new contract with my landlord." No, because I don't want to be still on the hook. Now, I just said, I mean, not because I don't love you, Stacy, but I want to terminate my contract if that was the case. Well, there are some things that can terminate a contract, and I call this Fabio. Now, for some of y'all, you don't know who Fabio is. Those of us that are old, remember, this is the guy who was on all those romance novels in the 80s and early 90s.
Hey, not old.
I'm okay being old. We saw
Good
him.
books, though. Good
So
books.
it's Fabio. He did look good back in the day. I don't know what he looks like now, but back in the day, he did look like those book covers. So this is me if I had to imagine him. I put this in AI. I was like, "Hey, if he was like the Terminator or something." Oh, that's okay, Stacy. I just used your name. She said her headphones would quit working. You heard me call my name. I was just using you for an example. Don't worry. So Fabio, full performance, agreement of the parties, breach, impossibility of performance, operation of law. These things will terminate a contract. I'll quickly go over what these mean. Full performance means everything was completed. Everything was completed. I promised to do X. You promised to do Y. I did X. You did Y. Now the contract is terminated. There's no power between us anymore because everything was completed. We're done. Full performance. Or we could have a contract and we could both agree we don't want to be under contract anymore. I don't want to X. You don't want to Y. Boom. We're not under contract anymore. It could be agreement of the parties. Now, there are types of agreement of the parties, including novation and accord and satisfaction. And I do believe that this is important enough for us to talk about the differences. Now, to talk about accord and satisfaction, actually, let's start with this one, novation. Novation, think of the word nova, or think of the, nova, which means new. So in that example where I said, "Hey, I don't want to sublet. I want to completely get off of this contract and replace Stacy, and she is new. We are completely getting rid of me, and now Stacy gets all the benefits and the responsibilities. So we completely replaced one party for another, or it's basically a new contract for another. That's a novation. I no longer have anything to do with nothing in a novation. We terminated the contract between me and the landlord. Right? That's novation. For accord and satisfaction, I need everybody to think back to what you know about your finance words. And we are going to talk about promissory notes, which we know a promissory note is your promise to pay. And I could sign a promissory note with a bank and say, hey, I'll repay you $500,000 in 30 years. Not to mention the interest, but let's just go with the principal part. I promise to pay you $500,000 over 30 years. Right? Well, what happens if I don't? I don't pay you all of that money. And for this, I want you all to think of a situation called a short sale. This is not a contract word per se, but I want to tie all of this to how you'd see it in real estate. In a short sale, Candace agreed to pay the bank $500,000, but the market sucks, and now all I can do is sell it for $400,000. So I'm short, let's just say I've paid off some of it, I'm short $70,000. Oh no. I owe them $500. I will have only paid back $400,000 if I sell this house, and I'm still short $70,000. That is a short sale. Now, one thing that could happen is the bank could allow me to sell the house as a short sale, and then that extra $70,000 I still owe them could be a judgment lien against me. Remember, the promissory note or the mortgage was a specific lien against my specific piece of real property. They could let me sell it in a short sale. I pay them the $400,000 that I get from the sale, and I still owe them the 70. There could be a $70,000 judgment against me. The house is now free and clear. Right? Short sale. That's what could happen and what's mostly going to happen. Every so often, the bank could be like, you know what? We like you. Don't you worry about that $70,000. We'll both be in accordance or agreement that giving us that $400,000 satisfies your debt. You already paid down $30,000 with your payments. Altogether, you've paid us $430,000. Let's just be in agreement that you've satisfied your debt and we don't want that $70,000 anymore. Before y'all get excited, that does not happen very often. Just doesn't happen that often, but it can be a thing. More than likely, if you ever see this in the real world, it would be like a seller financing contract, something like that. But you still need to understand this could be a thing, and you might run into this in short sales. So hopefully that it makes sense. If it doesn't, you all can let me know, or just next time on Wednesday when we do this again, be like, Candace, could you still go over that satisfaction thing, accord and satisfaction, because it doesn't make sense. I think it's probably a bit detailed, but I have seen some people come back and say they asked me about accord and satisfaction. I want to make sure you all are good. All right. So remember, I just said there's a difference between an assignment and a novation. Right? In a novation, you need all three parties involved. So if there was a contract, I don't want red, let's do purple. You had Candace and she's renting, and you have Z, who is the landlord, and we have a contract. Well, now we could have Stacy. She wants to be the new renter. In an ovation, I'm completely out. There's no Candace in an ovation. I no longer have any responsibilities. In an assignment, I'm still involved. I still have some responsibility, right? I retained responsibility of the obligations. I still have to make sure if Stacy doesn't pay, that I pay back that landlord. Hopefully that makes sense. They are very close, but also very different. Also, just because y'all have passed this class and listen to me talk about it, please don't walk into anybody's attorney or courtroom talking about, I learned in pre-licensing class. No, you didn't. You learned the Sesame Street version of what these words mean. Subject to, yes. Marilli, you asked, is subject to related to this? Yes. So let's talk about what subject to. I'm going to come back to subject to because I do believe I have a slide on that. I'm going to make sure before we end this class, I do talk about it, but I'm almost positive I talk about it in this. But if I don't, we'll come back to it. Actually, let me scroll. Sorry to make you all scroll. I just want to see, do I talk about subject to? You know what? Let's just talk about it real quick. And to make sure that we talk about subject to, I'm thinking the best way to explain it. Okay. Subject to is basically an assignment. So let's say we have a house and me, I own the house, but I did this by getting a loan from Bank of America. I bought this house by getting a loan from Bank of America. Now I want to sell the house to Marilli. Most of the time, what would happen is Marilli would pay me the price, the full price of the house, and then I would pay off the bank. That's what would normally happen. In a subject to, I'm selling to Marilli, but then I'm taking that, I'm basically got to pay, she's got to pay the bank. She pays the bank. So now money goes from Marilli to the Bank of America. If she does not pay, they're going to come back to me and be like, hey, Candace, we understand you thought you sold to Marilli, but she's not paying. Pony up. That would be like an assignment. I've kind of simplified it, but yes. Yes, the buyer is, at first it would seem like you are responsible for paying, but at the end of the day, if you don't, you bought the house subject to my original loan. So you would have to, you're supposed to pay the bank, but if you don't, I would have to pay. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Good. Okay, again, I'm not going to go into the details of this, but I notice these three words get confused all the time. I would say that assignment and assumption are very similar because they're still going to be, see how it says original party may or may not still be liable. Original party may not released from the liability. And both of these, the original person still has liability. You want to make sure you're safe and it doesn't come back to you. We got that NOVA, that new novation. It's replacing or substituting a new contract for a previous contract, or it could be replacing one person for another person. The original contract party is completely replaced. The original contract is completely replaced. So again, assignment, assumption, very close. Think of them almost like the same thing. Novation, completely different. All right, now we know we got under contract because we want to tattle. I swear, suing somebody is tattling to judge. Tattling to a judge. Why? Because when you were a kid, if somebody did you wrong, you ran to a parent or the teacher and said, so-and-so did something, make it better. That's what you're doing when you've got a contract. So-and-so promised to do something in writing and now they won't. Judge, make it better. It's tattling. And you can tattle when somebody breaches, when somebody doesn't perform one of their promises that they made in a contract. You tattle to a judge. You go, judge, they breached. And then you want the judge to make things better. So when you go to a judge to make things better, they could make things better by applying rescission or specific performance or an injunction. Rescission is basically go back to your original state. We basically say, hey, we don't care what's happened since you got under contract. Let's pretend this contract never existed. Or this is like an annulment. We all know that if you get married in Vegas and then 6 months later you decide to end the marriage, well, then you would be divorced. And from now until the rest of time, when you sign legal contracts, you don't get to say single anymore. You get to go divorced. But if you wake up the next morning and you decide to end the marriage immediately, then we call that annulled. It's like you were never married. And then you can in the future say, oh, no, I'm single. Married? That never happened. What? I don't know what you're talking about, Willis. That's rescission. It's the annulment. It's like it never happened. Everybody go back to what you had before it ever happened. Boom. Specific performance is when the court forces somebody to perform whatever specific promise they said they were going to do. Hey, you said you were going to pay me $350,000 for this house. Well, actually, let me do a realistic one. Because you can't really, in a lot of states, you can't force somebody to buy, but you can force them to sell. So let's say I had a piece of land. Let's say I had a piece of land, and that doesn't look like land because it's red. Boop. Call me crazy. Here's my piece of land. And Val agrees to buy it for $60,000. That's our purchase price. And we're under contract for 2 months. During that 2 months, I find out there's oil. There's actually a big old pocket of oil underneath my land. I no longer want to sell it for $60,000. So I look at Val and I go, no, absolutely not. I'm not selling it to you for $60,000. Well, depending on what our contract said, if I promised to sell it to her for $60,000, what's in writing, we met all the other legal obligations, then she could take me to court and say, dear judge, Candace is breaching this contract. She promised to sell it to me for $60,000. Now she's not. And a court could be, Candace, you will transfer the property to Val and she will pay you $60,000. You need to perform, Candace, whatever specific activity you said you were going to do. That is specific performance. And an injunction is when the court tells you you have to do something or you can't do something. For this one, think of HOA restrictive covenants. Covenant. However you spell covenant. Man, AI means I can't spell nothing anymore. So let's say you had a lot and it had a house and there was a fence. There was a picket fence. And the HOA restrictive covenant said that you can't have any fences over 5 feet. But this fence was actually 6 feet tall. If we're talking about an HOA thing, well, then you could take your neighbor to court and be like, hey, judge, our neighborhood covenants say no fences over 5 feet, and Candace has fence over 6 feet. When the court tells somebody to take that down, that's an injunction. The court is getting involved, making you do or not do something. There you go. Now, we know when you breach, one of these 3 things could happen. But this is America. And in America, what will make you feel better if somebody does you wrong is money. So sometimes the courts say, yeah, this person totally breached. They should pay you some money. And we call those money damages, and or just damages in general. And there's different flavors or types of damages. There's compensatory damages. You need to compensate somebody for a loss that you caused them. Consequential damages, you don't care about. I don't have enough time or energy to go into it anymore, but you should know it's a type of money damages. Liquidated damages is the big one. Liquidated damages is the one I need you to know. Right? Liquidated damages is when you have two parties in a contract. And in the contract, the two parties decided at the beginning, hey, if I breach, here's what you can have. You can have this big amount of money. Like your earnest money. Exactly. Like earnest money. Because isn't that what earnest money's saying? Hey, seller, if I decide not to buy your house at the last minute, here's some money that you can get. Yes. Liquidated damages are an amount of money agreed upon by the parties at the time of contract signing that establishes the damages that can be recovered if a party breaches. Earnest monies. They may not always legally be liquidated damages, but they're going to act like it, right? Earnest monies basically act like liquidated damages. Punitive damages is when somebody needs to be punished. You know what you were doing was wrong, so we're going to punish you. We're going to make this hurt. Pay out some money. And nominal damages, think jaywalking. If you had to pay a fine for jaywalking, what was it, $15? Not taking court fees into account. Those court fees are probably 5 times higher than whatever the ticket was. They're going to charge you because you were jaywalking, but it's going to be nominal. It's just going to be, well, we had to do something to you. That's nominal. All right. I know we said we're going to do contracts, and if everybody doesn't mind to stay a little longer, and if you have to go, you can. But there's no way I can talk about all those contract words and not deal with some other contract stuff that you need to know. So usually I teach this as a separate chapter, but I really feel like, especially, I don't remember who it was that said they could go over a review of contracts, but I really think we need to do this stuff too, but it shouldn't take as long. First, we need to know that I spelled essence wrong. The first thing we need to know is I spelled time is of the essence wrong. All right, I need to pull this together. I don't know how I missed this. Doesn't what do you call it? PowerPoint have spell check, the little red wavy line. I need to pull it together. But it's a statement that means timing is material. It gives a drop dead date, kind of like, taxes are due on the 15th, end story. But what had happened? No, taxes are due on the 15th. When you put time is of the essence in a contract, there's no wiggle room on that date or time. It is what it is. And if you miss that date and time, you're done. So just be very careful when using, or you see this time being of the essence or time is of the essence. It means you're creating this cannot wiggle around it, cannot move it date. And that may not be what you're trying to do legally, which is why you need to CYA, call your attorney before you start adding phrases in like time being of the essence. Don't play with that. Now we know, because we talked about MCLL, every offer has to have, or every contract has to have, mutual agreement. There has to be an offer and there has to be an unconditional acceptance. And we also know you're going to see the words offeror, the person making the offer, and offeree, the person receiving the offer. 9 times out of 10, if we're talking about sales, the offeror starts off being the buyer. The buyer is giving an offer to the seller. That makes the seller the offeree. They're the person receiving the offer. Now, hopefully this chart makes sense. When there's an offer, let me do it this way. When there's an offer, we start here, this offer. It's given to a seller normally, and the seller has 3 options. They can either accept it, they could reject it, or they could reject it and give a new offer. So if there's an offer from the buyer to the seller can either accept it, they can reject it, or they can counter. Well, remember, if they accept it, and remember, we know acceptance means communication of those signatures. Then once the seller signs and tells the buyer they've signed, then you're under contract. If they reject it, it's just a no, period. No, period. We don't want to, they don't talk about no. Well, how about no? Just no. That's a rejection. You have no contract. Most of the time, the seller will counteroffer, which is no and. It's like when you go to improv. If any of you all know what improv is, it's like whenever somebody's talking on the stage, they have to go da 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 da, and you have to add on, which I love improv because I'm corny like that, but it's a no and. This is the seller saying, no, I don't like your offer. And we would think about these terms though. They're adding something on, the no and. So they have a rejection and a new offer. So then this is from the seller, gives a counteroffer, otherwise known as a CALFR when I'm doing this, to the buyer. And now the buyer could either accept the counteroffer, or they could reject the counteroffer, or they could make they could counter the counteroffer. And you do this till eventually you just say, no, we're not getting together, or eventually a contract is formed. But most important, we know you're going to need signatures and you need communication of those signatures. That's going to be important. The offeror gives an offer to the offeree, and that offeree has to decide to accept it or reject it or to counter it. Our job as real estate agents in sales is to help people through this process and get to the acceptance faster if possible. So we know a counteroffer is a permanent, make this big again, boom, a permanent rejection of the previous offer. I tell kids all the time when I babysit friends' kids that I don't negotiate with terrorists. If I tell a kid, okay, you're going to bed in 30 minutes, this is your warning, and they go, oh, I don't want to go, can't we have a little bit more? 15. I'm not negotiating. Oh, you want to keep talking? It's about to be now. I do not negotiate with terrorists. Did I call the children terrorists? Yes, I did. That's why I don't have them. Right now, that is like a counter offer. It is a permanent rejection. This is not like it's a permanent rejection. Once they say, how about 15? We're not going back to 30. You complained about the 30 minutes, it's 15 or nothing. You cannot go back to the original offer. A permanent rejection of the original offer. Keyword here being permanent. And this happens anytime the seller, assuming the seller is the offeree, right? Assuming that the seller is the offeree, if they change anything. So if the offer says, hey, we want to close on October 31st, and the seller comes back and says, no, how about the 30th? There's a no, and now there's a new offer. That's a counteroffer. And if the buyer goes, you know what, we don't want the 30th, we walk away, then the buyer can do that. The seller can't be like, wait, just kidding, we'll take the 31st. I mean, you can try, but when that seller said no, that original offer is dead. Now, if there is a counter offer or an offer in general and it's not accepted, any earnest monies, and if you're in a state that has due diligence monies, they need to be returned. If you're selling a house and you get an offer from 7 different people, I think that's 7, and they all give you earnest money deposits and you don't accept them, you don't get to keep the money. They need to go back. We're going to come to contingency clauses in a moment, right? So if they're like, yeah, we're okay, we want to do August 31st, but we want to add a contingency. That's a no. We are not accepting it as it is right now. We want a new offer with a new contingency in it. So similar. Now, I know you all have seen something like this. Because I keep talking about this communication of signatures, this is so important. You can't just have a seller sign. The seller has to tell the buyer they're signed. We have to complete that circle in order for us to get under contract. We have to talk about how is it that you're telling? How can the seller tell the buyer? So assuming that the offeror, that's what that says, is the buyer, and the offeree is the seller. Once the seller signs, they must sign and they must notify. Well, what are your options? They could just orally tell the buyer, hey, by the way, I signed. You could deliver a signed contract back to the seller. You could just put it in their hands. I mean, the buyer, you could just put it in their hands. Fine, whatever. You could email or fax it to them. That's cool too. Remember, it's when it's received by the machine. So like I'm picked up my phone and it looks like somebody texted me at 7:42. Even though I'm not checking that text message and I won't until we finish this, it was received at 7:42. Boom. That's what we mean by fax and email. It's when it was received by the machine. That's when it was notified. And then you have this mailbox rule. Some states will teach you about the mailbox rule. And the idea is the moment this signed contract hits the mailbox, it is considered received. So if I'm the seller, right, and I want to tell this buyer, hey, we accept your offer. I sign it and I drop it in the mail. The second I drop it in the mail, we are under contract. If I get a better offer for $70,000 more, too bad, so sad. The mailbox rule, if your state does it, which most states do, but you've been taught what you haven't been taught. If you're in a state where they taught you about the mailbox rule, if I got this offer from the buyer, I signed it and I dropped it in the mailbox, and 40 minutes later, here comes a better offer, I cannot accept that offer because I got under contract the minute it hit the mailbox. Now, this only applies to accepting an offer. It does not apply to termination of offers or termination of contracts. Also, don't get confused with that one. Well, we're talking about terminating an offer and you cannot put it in the mailbox. So what does terminate an offer? Well, you already know counteroffer, right? A counteroffer will terminate and so will rejection. I mean, if it's rejected, obviously it's terminated. I should probably add that, hello. But other things will terminate an offer. If too much time goes by, if the offeror, person giving the offer, dies or goes insanity prior to acceptance, that terminates it. The offeror could revoke their offer prior to acceptance. There could be too much time. So this is a specified time limit, a reasonable time limit. Could, you waited 7 months to accept my offer? Absolutely not. No. Or if there was a power of attorney that, signed an offer on behalf of a buyer, then yeah, that's not going to work either. I like to teach this as wild card, termination of an offer. They could be withdrawn. Somebody could go insane. Too much lapse of time. It could be death of one of the parties. It could be a counteroffer. Acceptance terminates an offer because it became a contract. Rejection and destruction of the property. If the property is destroyed while you put an offer on it, then never mind. Offer's gone. A lot of times you all get confused between addenda or an addendum versus an amendment. Think of addenda before you get under contract. It's added to an offer, right? It's added to an offer and it becomes part of the original contract. An amendment changes an already existing contract. Right? It's an edit made to a contract that already exists. You made it after the contract is signed. So an addendum, think of like the lead-based paint. Addendum. If the house was built before 1979, 78, look at me losing my mind. If it was built before 1978, am I losing my, it's 1978, right? Then you have to add the addendum. You added it to the original offer. It was always part of the original contract. Now, contingencies. You asked about this really, and so a contingency is adding an exit. It's adding an exit clause to a contract. So you might have one that says, hey, if it doesn't appraise, we get out. We get to exit the contract. If I can't get financing, we get to get out of this contract. If we don't like the inspection results or we don't like the repairs that are needed, we get to exit out of the contract, right? If it's going to be a short sale, we get to exit out of this contract. Or sometimes you can do, hey, buyer, seller, I want to buy your home, but if I can't sell my home, I don't have to buy your house. I get to exit the contract if I can't sell my current home. That's a contract contingency. Those are clauses in the contract that add an exit, an escape clause for one of the parties. Does that make for is it beneficial for both? You know, it depends. It depends on what the contingency is. You know, I think it's hard for sellers to accept a contingent sale addendum because yeah, that helps the buyer. Hey, just by the way, seller, if I can't find somebody to buy my house, I can't buy your house and I get my earnest money back. But if you're the seller, if the buyer's got a piece of crap house and can't get it sold, you wasted all this time, and then because they couldn't sell their piece of crap house, you don't get to keep their earnest money. Like, that doesn't sound cool to me. So I'm not going to say it's always beneficial, it's always detrimental to one of the parties. It is what it is. And this is why we hire attorneys to help us understand, you know, is this a good idea or a bad idea? I know that where students get confused is the difference between what terminates an agency contract versus a sales contract versus an offer. Of all my slides, this is like top 5 important. If you're going to take this real estate exam, I need you to understand the difference between what terminates an agency contract, what terminates a sales contract, and what terminates an offer. Notice, death of a client in an agency contract and death of the offeror in a purchase contract will terminate that contract. But if we're talking about a sales contract, it is not the death of the parties. I mean, I'm not going to go over all of these right now, but this right here, I know earlier I said there was 20. This is 100 plus. You need to know it. You must know these things. Death terminates an offer. Death terminates an agency contract. Death does not terminate a sales contract. Boom. Now, before I'll probably be done about 8:30, so this took about an hour and a half. You got an installment land contract. An installment land contract is also known as just a land contract or a contract for deed. And you're paying an installment. You're making periodic installments. And then once you make your final payment, then you get title. So you can see this last sentence. A contract for the sale of real estate where the purchase price is paid in periodic installments. And the purchaser, who is in possession of the property, even though title is retained by the seller, which may not be, is retained by the seller until a future date, which may not be until the final payment. So think of this like layaway. It's like layaway. Did I say layaway right? I don't even know. And remember, equitable title is the right to claim title later. And I think I have a slide that explains this better. Oh, here we go. Equitable title is when you are next in line. You're the next buyer in line. So you got the seller. He has title. And then this buyer, when you finish paying, the title goes to you. The right that for this come to you at some point, that's equitable title. The right to claim title later. And it is a legal interest. I'm trying to see if I have this picture here. Oh, I took it out. Okay, so let's talk about it this way. In an installment land contract, let's say you put something on layaway and then you stop payments. Do you get anything? If you make payments on layaway and then you stop paying, do they pay you anything? No, absolutely not. You just made payments for nothing. You just stopped paying. That's their money now. That's an installment land contract. If you pay off what you want for that property the way you're supposed to, then it's yours. You don't get anything until then. That's an installment land contract versus an option. In an option, the seller agrees to keep an open offer to sell or lease real property, but it's going to cost you money. So the slide I was thinking about is this. In an option, imagine you go to the thrift store. If I could right now, I would play that Macklemore song about the thrift store. But let's say you see this couch and you pay them money. Maybe you pay them $10 to put it on hold. You pay them $10 to put it on hold because you need to see if that couch is going to fit. You pay the $10 to the thrift store. And for that $10, they are promising when you come back tomorrow, the couch will still be there. They won't up the price to $15. They won't put off. No, for $10, you are putting a hold on that couch so nobody else can buy it. If you decide not to buy it, then they're just going to keep your $10 and you keep on rolling. But if they tell you this $10 gets you a 48-hour hold, for 48 hours, they can't sell that house to or that couch to anybody else. That is an option. Because the seller is giving the buyer the exclusive right to purchase at a set price. For $10, you said, you promised thrift store not to sell this to anybody else. I will be back and pay you $70 for this couch. If you decide not to come back and pay the $70 for the couch, then they just keep the $10 and everybody keeps rolling. If later that day I come along, I'm like, ooh, this is a really nice couch. I see that Stacy's name is here as a whole, but hey, she's only willing to pay $80 total between the hold and the $70. I'll give you $200 right now. If there's a hold, the thrift store cannot just skip over somebody else. They have to give it to the person who paid the hold money for the price they agreed to. That's an option. How does that differ from an installment land contract? In an installment land contract, this is like a rent to own. If you go to a rent to own, you take like errands. I know some of y'all have errands. You go home and you get the couch and it goes home with you. And you pay monthly. And then 5 years later, you've paid them 5 times more than what the couch is worth. But after you make all the agreed-upon payments, then it becomes yours. Rent to own, that's an installment land contract. You get to use it, but you're getting equitable title. Eventually, it will be yours after you make that final payment. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. The difference between putting something on hold at a thrift store versus an installment land contract being rent to own. Good. Thank you, Marilla. It does make sense. Yay. So just so we're reminded, an option is a unilateral contract. The seller is promising to sell, but the buyer is not promising to buy. If I decide to buy, you, seller, are promising to sell it to me at this price, but I'm not promising to buy. I'll let you know what I decide. I'm just going to put you on hold. Then once the buyer says, yes, I want to buy it, then it becomes a bilateral contract. Going all the way back to more than an hour ago, we're tying these words and these concepts back up. Now, similar to an option, and I think this is the greatest sentence ever, And in an option, the owner must sell, the buyer does not have to buy, and the price is predetermined. If there's only one of these that you know, make it be this one. But similar, you have a right of first opportunity and the right of first refusal. These are going to be if the owner decides to sell. This is basically giving dibs. This is basically saying, hey, this is so awesome. If you ever decide to sell it, would you come to me first? That's all this right of first opportunity and the right of first refusal is. If you decide to sell, you promise to come to me. And the right of first opportunity, there is a predetermined price. And a right of first refusal, they promise to come to you to match offers. So let's say I have a piece of land. You know, I like green for my land. And that's actually black, but we'll go with it. And let's say Target wants it. If we're talking about the right of first opportunity, we would have decided, hey, Target, you can buy my land for $1.1 million if I decide to sell. We've already set a predetermined price. And they're going to pay me money. Target might give me maybe they give $10,000. So for the next year, they give me $10,000 cash. And for the next year, if I decide to sell, I'm going to sell it to them for $1.1 million. Or it could be a right of first refusal. Change colors. And a right of first refusal, if I didn't change the color. Gosh darn it. Boom. If I decide to sell, they can match other offers. So maybe here comes Walmart. And they offer me 1.5 mil. If it's a right of first refusal, Target might have given me 5K. They gave me $5,000. So if Walmart or anybody else comes to them and says, Candace, we want to buy your property for 1.5 million, they have to come to me first. They have to get the ability to match what Walmart would be willing to pay. It's basically Target saying, okay, Candace, we really want it, but we know that you're not ready to sell. But if you do sell, or somebody comes to you and says they'll, sell it to you for X amount, we want first dibs. You can't sell it to anybody else until you see if we want to pay what they're willing to pay. That is your difference between right of first opportunity. So your first opportunity has this predetermined price, and a first refusal where they have to match. I haven't come up with a good way to remember that, but it just hit me. Maybe you could refuse a match. Maybe if Serena or Venus came to me and said, hey, Candace, we want to play a tennis match with you. No, I have the right to refuse that. I don't want to embarrass myself. I could refuse that match because I don't want to embarrass myself. That might be how I remember right of first refusal. The right of first opportunity, maybe I'll think OP and then the P here for predetermined. I don't know. I have not come up with a great way to remember these, but if somebody else does, let me know. And that, boys and girls, it is 8:34. So it would have taken me exactly an hour and a half. I'm hoping that this helps. Stacy, I hope this review helps before you test, that I hit some things here. Now, guys, I did this in an hour and a half. If you've ever seen one of my long reviews that I used to do for, what was the name of that group? I can't think of the name of the group right now, but if you ever saw those, I would usually do contracts in like 4 hours. I did not hit everything. I hit the high points on words you most definitely need to know. If I talked about it today, you need to know it for the test. Oh, you are so very welcome, Miss Maribel. Oh, thank you, Miss Val. Yes, I'm gonna go, guys. I have some leftover 4th of July stuff I would like to eat and maybe catch one last fireworks show before our holiday is over. As always, if you have questions, you all know you can reach me, or if you want copies of anything, it is Candace Ellis at Gmail. So peace out, everybody. Have a good rest of your, Sunday before you go back to work on Monday, and I'll see y'all Wednesday. Bye.